drugs, mental health, maternity and newborn care, preventive care, emergency room visits, hospitalizations, outpatient care, rehab visits, lab services, and pediatric care. That's not progress. That's not a fix. That's a potential health crisis for every American. My Republican colleagues are well aware of this. Why else would they have drafted this bill and these last-minute changes in secret? Why else would complicated legislation affecting the lives of millions be sent to the floor just 2 weeks after it was introduced, with no congressional hearings, not a single one, on a bill that impacts the health care of nearly every American family? And why else would they rush the bill to the floor without an updated Congressional Budget Office estimate of how much coverage and care will be lost by their backroom deal that ends consumer protections? I get it. I wouldn't want to, nor would I know how to justify giving nearly $1 trillion in tax cuts to corporations and the wealthy, paid for by threatening the health and well-being of millions and millions of American families. And who's getting these huge windfalls? Companies like Amgen, annual profits of more than $3 billion. Medtronic, annual profits of more than $6 billion. And Gilead Sciences, $13 billion in profits in 2016 alone. When the CBO released its report last week showing that 24 million hardworking Americans will be left without health care coverage by 2026 if we pass this bill, that premiums will rise 15 to 20% next year, that people will pay thousands of dollars more in deductibles and out-of-pocket costs, and that older Americans will be priced out of the market by an age tax, I thought for sure it was dead on arrival, that there was no way my Republican colleagues would walk this plank. But here they are, and they are trying to take millions of American families with them. 14 million Americans will lose health coverage next year if this bill is approved. 21 million will lose coverage in the next 3 years alone, wiping out all of the coverage gains from the ACA in just 3 years. For pretty much everyone else in the individual market, deductibles and other costs will be higher. And for lower-income individuals, out-of-pocket costs will be much higher. Insurance companies will again be able to sell plans with much less financial protection. And we will return to the days when millions of people in this country will live in fear that they are always one serious illness or accident away from bankruptcy. This bill will result in the largest transfer of wealth from struggling families to the well-off in our nation's history, giving $1 trillion in tax breaks to millionaires, billionaires, and corporations. It is Robin Hood in reverse, but this is far worse because access to life-saving care is being stolen. I don't say that casually. I have met people, constituents of mine, whose lives have been saved because of the Affordable Care Act. This from one of my constituents. My name is Kevin Schweitzer. I'm 62 years old, and I'm a lifelong resident of Louisville, Kentucky. I worked hard, took risks, and built a successful small business that I sold at age 59. My wife and I were excited about our prospects as we headed into early retirement. As a retiree too young for Medicare, I purchased health insurance on the open market. Less than a year later, I was diagnosed with lymphoma. I've undergone multiple scans and 2 cycles of chemo. I am winning the battle so far, but since this disease is in my blood, I will be fighting it for the rest of my life. A cancer diagnosis is a life-changing event that not only attacks the body, but the mental stress is just as tough to deal with. Thanks to Obamacare, I've been able to rest easier knowing that my illness wouldn't bankrupt my family and that I'll be able to provide for my wife even after I'm gone. I also heard from a young woman named Sarah Atkins. She suffers from chronic kidney disease. Sarah was able to get health insurance because of the ACA. On January 9, 2011, it saved her life. One of her kidneys shut down and almost went septic. If she didn't have coverage, she would have waited or not gone to the hospital at all. The doctor told her that if she had arrived at the ER an hour later, she would have died. Mr. Speaker, the health of my constituents, Kevin Schweitzer and Sarah Atkins, is at stake in this debate. They and the hundreds of other constituents I've heard from who have serious and chronic health conditions will need high-quality, affordable health coverage for the rest of their lives. Under this bill, they will get less coverage, it will cost more, and eventually they will be priced out of the market, leaving them nowhere to turn for the care they need. And that's not all. Because of the last-minute changes to this bill, insurers will be able to sell stripped-down coverage to weed out people with pre-existing conditions. They will be able to refuse, for example, to offer coverage for chemotherapy drugs and cancer treatments, insulin pumps, hospital stays, and prescription drugs that treat chronic conditions across the board. Basically, if you have a serious health problem, the care you need may not be available to you at all. When the American people were promised by President Trump and Republican congressional leadership that their existing coverage would be preserved and that everybody would have insurance and it would be less expensive and much better, they understandably believed they would be treated much better than this. None of those promises are in this bill. In fact, the opposite of every one of those promises is what's in this bill. Those were promises made to every family in our congressional districts, and this bill fails them at every turn. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to oppose this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is now my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. And, Mr. Speaker, I would remind my friend from Kentucky that every promise made to the American people in support of Obamacare was rapidly broken. And we are now at this moment in time when we're watching the death throes of Obamacare. More people are paying the steep tax penalty or claiming hardship exemptions than are buying Obamacare policies. In a third of our counties, there is no choice left at all. You get one provider. Soon, we're warned some regions will have no providers at all. Premiums soared an average of 25% last year, and this year we're warned it could be 40% or more. You know, critics cite the CBO estimate that 24 million Americans will lose their coverage, but it's important to understand their reasoning there. The CBO believes that people won't buy health insurance unless we force them to buy health insurance. In fact, people won't buy health insurance that's not a good value for them, and clearly Obamacare isn't. We replace it with a vigorous buyer's market where plans across the country will compete to offer consumers better services at lower prices tailored to their own needs and wants. And we assure these plans are within their financial reach with $90 billion of additional support that the CBO simply ignores. The AHCA's biggest achievement is to replace coercion with choice for every American. It ends the individual mandate that forces Americans to buy products they don't want. It ends the employer mandate that's trapped many low-income workers in part-time jobs. It begins to restore consumers' freedom of choice, the best guarantee of quality and value in any market. It allows Americans to meet more of their health care needs with pre-tax dollars. It relieves the premium base of the enormous costs of pre-existing conditions by moving them to a block-granted assigned risk pool. Mr. Speaker, Obamacare's collapsing, premiums are skyrocketing, providers are fleeing. This may well be our last off-ramp on this road to ruin.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague that his vote for this bill will result in 38,200 people from his congressional district in California losing health care and coverage, and I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlelady from California, a distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Ms. Lee.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our ranking member for your steadfast leadership as our ranking member of the Budget Committee. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 1628, which is a bill to take away health care from 24 million Americans. Whether you believe it or not, health care is a basic right. This shameful bill steals from those who can least afford it, including seniors, veterans, people living with HIV, children, the disabled. It would, yes, rip away health care from 24 million people. It would reduce benefits, make families pay more for less, and transfer $600 billion in tax cuts to the very wealthy. This is outrageous. Access to women's health is denied by defunding Planned Parenthood. Medicaid, as we know it, will end. Health care costs for working families and seniors will skyrocket. And now it eliminates essential health benefits like maternity, mental health, and emergency care. This is not a health bill. It's a tax giveaway to the wealthy. And let me just tell you, as a woman of faith, I am appalled and I am sad by the hypocrisy displayed in this bill by people who say they are religious. I want to remind you, in the scriptures, the book of Mark, chapter 12, Verse 31, we are reminded to love your neighbor as yourself. This bill shows disdain for the most vulnerable and would lead to death and destruction and disease of millions of Americans. I hope Republicans remember to love their neighbor as themselves today and vote no on this mean-spirited bill. Let's defeat this harmful and morally bankrupt bill. This is a matter of life and death, and the American people deserve better.
Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is now my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, a member of the Budget Committee.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Madam Chairman, for yielding. You know, the American people spoke loudly and clearly last November. In fact, they've been speaking loudly and clearly ever since this fatally flawed bill called the Obamacare was signed into law. And now we're hours away from the vote that the American people have been waiting for years for. This vote can be distilled down to simply this. And each member of this body must ask themselves this simple question. Are they willing to allow Obamacare to remain the law of the land, or are we going to begin to restore health care decisions to the American people and their doctors? Those who choose to vote against the American Health Care Act, regardless of how they attempt to justify it, will be voting to keep Obamacare in place. This is an inescapable fact, a fact that will remain long after the smoke and spin of handwriting from political pundits following this vote has gone and disappeared, regardless of how the votes go. There is no such thing as perfect legislation. In a body of 435 men and women representing 435 different parts of the nation, but there is consensus among the American people that this law should be repealed and replaced. And today, the People's House will either acknowledge the will of the people or we will defy it. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague that his vote for this bill will result in 40,500 people from his congressional district in Ohio losing health coverage and care. And I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, a distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Moulton.
Gentleman from Massachusetts, recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd also like to remind my colleague that the latest poll put the will of the American people at 17% in favor of this bill. I'd like to read a message from a Republican constituent. Quote, the American Health Care Act would strain the fiscal resources necessary to support the Commonwealth's continued commitment to universal health coverage. This constituent is the Republican governor of Massachusetts, who knows that Trump Care destroys our ability to ensure access to quality, affordable health care coverage. Another Republican in my state, Governor Mitt Romney, worked with the Democratic legislature to create the nation's first system to provide affordable, comprehensive health care. Romney Care wasn't perfect, but Republicans and Democrats worked together to improve it. And they created a system with higher approval ratings than Trump Care or even Obamacare. We can do this. Health care should not be partisan. It should be about investing in our people, in our families, and in our future so that Americans can live healthy, productive lives. But that's not what this Republican Trump Care bill does. Michael is a constituent from Gloucester, the old fishing city. He was prescribed OxyContin by his doctors and then became addicted. But he was able to enter a treatment program through Medicaid, the kind of program that will be cut by Trump Care. He is now back at work as an electrician, and he says that the Affordable Care Act saved his life. I'm a veteran, and I get my health care at the VA, but sometimes it takes me weeks to get an appointment. If this Republican bill passes, it will throw 8 million veterans off private health care, forcing them into the VA and creating even longer wait times.
Expired.
What we should be doing is coming
Gentleman's
together
time is
in
expired.
Washington as Democrats and
Gentlelady from
Republicans
Tennessee.
to have an honest debate
Thank you,
and
Mr.
improve
Speaker.
health care.
It is now my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Lewis, who is a distinguished member of the Budget Committee.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the American Health Care Act, and I ask the other side, just what is it you are trying to preserve by voting no? Premiums rising double digits for years, for the last 7 years. In my home state of Minnesota, back-to-back premium increases of 50 to 67%. Young, healthy people being priced out of the insurance market, 8 million in 2014, choosing to pay the penalty instead of buying insurance. That is the genesis of the death spiral in the insurance markets. That's what this bill is trying to correct. Deductibles, co-pays. I had a deductible in my own individual policy. A skyrocketing deductible. There are deductibles of $13,000. That's not health care. That's not even access. Drug formularies being tightened to save money so people are denied prescription drugs. A prescription drug tax. Thousands of Minnesotans losing their plans. 100,000 when a big insurer dropped out. 1,000 counties with one insurer. That's what you're trying to preserve on the other side? People voting no on this bill? Emergency state legislation trying to prop up MNsure in my home state because it is failing. And $1 trillion in taxes and spending that's bankrupting the country. That's what the other side is trying to preserve, and those voting no on this bill. We have a choice today. You can embrace the status quo and see the markets spiral out of control completely, or you can vote for change and do the right thing. I yield my time.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague that his vote for this bill will result in 50,200 people from his congressional district in Minnesota losing health coverage and care. And I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from New York, a distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Jeffries.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
The Trump presidency has been characterized by chaos, crisis, and confusion, and this Republican health care debacle has been no different. The American people clearly understand that Trump care will be an unmitigated disaster. Under Trump care, working families will pay more and get less. Under Trump care, premiums will increase. Under Trump care, co-pays will increase. Under Trump care, deductibles will increase. Under Trump care, out-of-pocket expenses will increase. Under Trump care, 24 million hardworking Americans will lose their health coverage. Under Trump care, individuals between the age of 50 and 64 will pay a regressive age tax. Health care is a matter of life and death. That is why we take it so seriously. And Trump care will lead to increased death, disease, and destitution, and that's why we oppose this horrible piece of legislation.
Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's now my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Arrington, who is a member of the Budget Committee.
Gentleman from Texas recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Speaker, Obamacare's disastrous effects over the last several years have wreaked havoc on our small businesses, broken the backs of middle and working class families, and have had a disproportionately negative impact on rural America. Those are the folks that I represent in West Texas. While the current bill before us is far from perfect, and let's be honest, there's no such thing as perfect legislation. It reverses course and takes us in the right direction. It repeals the mandates and restores freedom to individuals and markets. It repeals about $1 trillion of taxes. It reduces deficit spending by over $100 billion, making it the largest entitlement reform since the 1960s. It rolls back regulations, gives maximum flexibility to states, and begins to defederalize health care. For 7 years now, Republicans have promised the American people that if we're given control of the presidency and the House and the Senate, then we would repeal and replace Obamacare. And now that we're given the opportunity to govern and to keep our promises and to deliver results for the American people, we can't let perfect be the enemy of good. The debate is now closing. We have two choices. We either pass a good but imperfect bill or we leave Obamacare in place. That's an unacceptable alternative. As leaders, we have a moral obligation to do something, to not stand idly by while the people suffer under a system that is failing them. If we're going to restore the greatness of America and transfer power back to the people, we need more than policy solutions, even perfect policy solutions. We need the political will and the courage to lead. This is a rescue mission, Mr. Speaker, and it isn't without risk. But I have faith in the President and his team. I have faith in our states and the free markets. And above all, Mr. Speaker, I have faith in the American people. I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague that his vote for this bill will result in 60,400 people from his congressional district in Texas losing health coverage and care. And I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, a distinguished member of the Budget Committee and the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Higgins.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, this never needed to be an ideological fistfight. Democrats were always willing to take into account serious and constructive alternatives to the law that we have today to make it better, to make it affordable, more affordable for the American people. But this bill is a blatant takeaway from the American people of money and protection. If you're 50 to 64 years old, you get clobbered. If you're 64 years old, you make $26,000 a year. According to the Republican-led Congressional Budget Office, your premiums go from $1,700 a year to $14,000 a year. Fact, United Healthcare is one of the largest private health insurers in America. Fact, United Healthcare will have $200 billion in revenues this year, and they paid their chief executive officer $66 million in compensation in 2014. Fact, United Healthcare is under investigation today by the Department of Justice for stealing billions of dollars from the Medicare program. Fact, the Republican health bill on page 67, in 7 words, gives United Health, their high-paid executives and all of their cronies, a massive tax cut to continue to screw the American people. Mr. Speaker, we can do much better. We are prepared to do much better. But this is a financial assault on good, hard-working Americans that want to do one thing at the end of the day after paying too much money for health care throughout the year. And that is, when they need their health care, it's available to them and their family. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's now my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, a distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Faso.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to point out to my colleagues that a fundamental change is being made with the new health law we have before us. And that is, we are for the first time equalizing the treatment of people who do not have employer-provided health care. Those of us who have employer-provided health care, 170 million Americans, that is not a taxable event for them. It is not a taxable event where they have to pay tax at the end of the year on the value of that employer-provided health care. And yet, if you're the person who does not have employer-provided health care, if you're the husband and wife with 2 kids making $45,000 or $50,000 and your employer does not provide health care, you receive absolutely no tax subsidy through the tax code. This bill, through the advanced refundable tax credits, will for the first time give someone the choice to buy health care and give them the opportunity and the means to buy health care that they previously have not had. It is not a markedly important distinction, frankly, from the Affordable Care Act, where you only could buy the health care through an exchange-approved policy. This policy, under this legislation today, will allow someone the flexibility and the freedom to buy a policy of their choosing, not one dictated by Washington. So that is a fundamental, important distinction between the status quo and what this legislation would offer. Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, I urge support for the bill. It is not perfect, as we all know, but it is something that is long overdue. And I would also point out that the numbers that my colleague from Kentucky uses are really based upon fantasy. Those numbers are simply incorrect, and the people of our state and our country will have health care under the provisions of this bill, and we will work hard to ensure that they do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague that his vote for this bill will result in 65,800 people from his congressional district in New York losing health coverage and care. And I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Washington, a distinguished member of the Budget Committee and the Ways and Means Committee, Ms. Del Bene.
Gentlelady from Washington is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Republicans crafted legislation that lived up to the promise of insurance for everybody, they'd have broad bipartisan support. But that's not what they did. This bill threatens massive disruption and chaos, not only to our healthcare system, but to middle-class families. Families who sit at their kitchen table trying to figure out how to pay their mortgage, buy groceries, and also get health coverage for their kids. This Republican bill does nothing to help them. In their rush to check a political box, Republicans have crafted legislation that does nothing but hurt working Americans. And in the last 24 hours, it's gone from bad to worse. Make no mistake, the changes made in the 11th hour to appease the most extreme members of Congress have put life-saving care even further out of reach. Some may use alternative facts, but this is reality, and the reality is that their bill robs $75 billion from Medicare, forces older Americans to pay 5 times more than others, and shifts $312 billion in out-of-pocket costs onto middle-class families. But this is about more than numbers. It's about people, like Rachel from Kirkland, Washington, who suffered a heart attack and blood clot at the age of 35. She now depends on frequent tests, medications, and doctor's visits to stay healthy. Thankfully, it's all covered by her insurance. Rachel told me, quote, "I'm horrified by the talking point that equates repealing the Affordable Care Act with getting freedom back. For me, the loss of the ACA gives me nothing but the freedom to die sooner and worry more," end quote. I'm not voting against this bill because it's a Republican bill. I'm voting no for families like Rachel's. Healthcare doesn't need to be a partisan issue, and I stand ready and willing to work on common sense solutions that expand coverage and reduce costs. But I was sent here to make my constituents' lives better. This bill does not do that. I encourage my colleagues to vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, who is a distinguished member of our Budget Committee.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise to repeal the disaster that is Obamacare. Obamacare functions as a wet blanket over the American economy, stopping businesses from growing and impairing the rights of individuals to make their own decisions about health care. Mr. Speaker, I specifically implore my conservative colleagues to vote for this bill and give us a chance to get out from under this disastrous law. This legislation represents $1 trillion in tax cuts, $1.15 trillion in spending cuts, $150 billion in deficit reduction, defunding Planned Parenthood. How long have we been fighting to defund Planned Parenthood? Close the illegal alien loophole that allows people to enroll in Obamacare only to check their status in this country subsequently. We install work requirements. I don't think people that are able to work but choose not to should expect us to go borrow money from China to pay for their health care. Installing those work requirements is fundamental to bold conservative reform. Block grants for states so that finally they can be liberated from the oppressive hand of the federal government, and also blocking states from additional Medicaid expansion. We have been engaging in these conservative fights for years, and finally today we've got the chance to put a win on the board. And so I am joining our president, our speaker, many conservatives in this Congress in voting for the American Health Care Act. And when we win, when we do this, not only do we enhance our economy, not only do we free up opportunities for broader prosperity in America, but we allow people to be in charge of health care. And we move from a government-centered system to a patient-centered system. That was the promise we made in the elections, and that is the promise I intend to keep by voting for this bill. I yield back to the gentlelady from Tennessee.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague that his vote for this bill will result in 56,000 people from his congressional district in Florida losing health coverage and care. And I yield 1 minute 45 seconds to the gentlelady from Florida, distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Ms. Wasserman
Florida
Schultz.
is recognized for 105 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in opposition to the Republican Pay More for Less Care Act, under which Americans will suffer from higher health care costs, less coverage, a crushing age tax, and a ransacking of the Medicare Trust Fund, which our seniors depend on for long-term care. Under the age tax, Americans aged 50 to 64 will be forced to pay 5 times higher premiums than others, no matter how healthy they are. Under Trump Care, a 64-year-old with an income of $26,500 in the individual market will pay $12,900 more in their premiums every year under this bill. In addition, Trump Care will take away health care from 24 million hardworking Americans and will force families to pay higher premiums and deductibles. In fact, for families enrolled in the ACA marketplace, premiums are expected to increase by 15 to 20%. It will also punish millions of people who experience a lapse in coverage by forcing them to pay a 30% higher premium each month in order to receive care. Tell that to Suzanne Boyd from Sunrise, Florida, who, with 2 daughters heading to college, lost her husband to lung cancer and then lost the insurance coverage she had through his employer. Thankfully, she was able to obtain coverage under the ACA for $192 a month with subsidies, rather than a 30% Republican sick tax for getting a life-threatening illness. And yet, this bill apparently isn't harmful enough for the far-right extremists in the Republican Party, who Republican leadership has tried to appease by cutting the ACA's essential benefits, like mental health, maternity, and emergency services. Mr. Speaker, this bill is like taking a sledgehammer to a clock that is moving a little slow, rather than working on precision fine-tuning instead. It is an immoral piece of legislation, and as a breast cancer survivor, I urge every member to stand with my sister survivors all across the country who number in the millions to make sure that you don't devastate our health and make sure that we don't have our lives threatened.
Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you.
Mr.
I yield
Speaker.
back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is now my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Indiana and the Vice Chair of the Budget Committee, Mr. Okeefe.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the Speaker and I thank the Chairwoman. I'm really proud, Mr. Speaker, of the Budget Committee. We did great work last week, and everyone was heard. 6 motions on the Republican side, 6 motions on the Democratic side, and the debate was civil. Tones weren't raised. Theatrics, by and large, weren't employed. And we made the bill better. And that was the process the week before that, when the committees of jurisdiction had this legislation. And it's my hope that as we pass this bill off the floor of the House, and it is a bill being passed off the floor of the House, not into law right now, but as it goes to the Senate, that the bill will continue to be improved. And that is the legislative process. I'm just very proud of the members and staff of the Budget Committee for being a major part of that process, starting that process. We did good work. You don't have to pass this bill to find out what's in it, as we had to with Obamacare. This process will continue. I'm very pleased also that we have Medicaid block grants, or lump sum payments to the states, that are available now to cover at least our able-bodied children and adults. That's a huge step forward in letting states have the flexibility they need to decide who really needs this assistance, how they should get it, and what they should get in terms of health care. This is good legislation. This is what we were sent to do, and we're keeping our promises to the American people by passing this legislation. I urge all my colleagues to vote yes. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my friend from Indiana that his vote for this bill will result in 37,900 people from his congressional district losing health coverage and care. And I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Boyle.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition of Trump Care. The Republican plan to cut Medicare and Medicaid, increase health care costs, and take health care away from tens of millions of Americans, all while providing the largest transfer of wealth from working families to our nation's richest. All of this in the name of choice and freedom. But we all know that under this bill, that's just code for survival of the fittest. economic Darwinism. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me bring this a little closer to home for me. Thanks to Trump Care, 36,700 of my constituents covered by the ACA's Medicaid expansion now stand to lose life-saving coverage. And here's one of them. Constituent Maura McGrath, a 17-year-old with Down syndrome. Maura's parents, Joe and Rita, know firsthand why Medicaid is so important. Medicaid has been critical to keeping their daughter alive and saving their family from bankruptcy. Even though Joe and Rita both work, the cost of Maura's care is too expensive to afford on their own. Not to mention Rita is a breast cancer survivor, and Joe suffers from Parkinson's disease. Medicaid provides the McGraths the peace of mind knowing Maura will receive the care that she needs, and they aren't alone to fend for themselves, given the tough hand they've been dealt. Mr. Speaker, for Maura and everyone in my district, say no to Trump Care. I yield back.
Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise unscripted in passionate support of freedom. I've heard many statements with words like fact and details of the minutia of these plans. I'll share with you a fact. 200 years ago, my ancestral forefather was born a young, poor Irishman, born into indentured servitude, and he heard a whisper of a land born across the sea, a land where a man could own his own property, land where a man could keep the toil of his labor. So he garnered his courage, and he saved his money, and he booked passage upon a cargo vessel converted to carry human beings, according to the letter unearthed by my sainted mother. His sleeping berth measured 2 by 2 by 5. What could have driven my ancestral forefather and yours, Mr. Speaker, indeed all of America? What drove our ancestral forefathers to come to this land? Freedom. Freedom drove us, and it's freedom for which I stand. The Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, is 8,000 pages. 8,000 pages of regulation and taxation. There's not a man nor a woman amongst us from sea to shining sea that believes this body can produce 8,000 pages of freedom. The American Health Care Act is 124 pages of reasonable legislation based upon the best input of free market principles. A vote against the American Health Care Act is a vote against freedom. It's a vote against 124 pages of reasonable legislation. And it's a vote for 8,000 pages of Obamacare. I urge my colleagues to vote.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Yes.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague that his vote for this bill will result in 50,100 people from his congressional district in Louisiana losing health coverage and care. And I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlelady from Washington, the distinguished vice-ranking member of the Budget Committee, Ms. Jayapal.
Gentlelady from Washington is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank the distinguished gentleman for yielding and for his tremendous leadership. Mr. Chairman, this reckless Republican plan is a betrayal of the American people. How is it a betrayal? Callously stripping 24 million people of health care, that's a betrayal. Putting an age tax on people aged 50 to 64 who will pay up to $14,000 more in annual premiums, that's a betrayal. Gutting essential benefits like maternity care and prescription drug coverage and emergency services, and fundamentally destroying protections for Americans with pre-existing conditions, that is a betrayal. And slashing Medicaid by $880 billion and stripping the safety net for our seniors and our kids and people with disabilities, that's a betrayal. The burden of all of this, Mr. Chairman, will fall on the states who will have to come up with billions of dollars. Mr. Speaker, this bill is not about freedom or choice. This bill is a travesty, and the American people will pay the price. This is not a health care bill. The only people who benefit are millionaires and billionaires and insurance companies who will get $1 trillion in tax benefits while working Americans pay more and get nothing. Mr. Chairman, this bill is pure greed, and real people will suffer and die from it. Vote no and protect our care.
Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to recognize that our members on the other side of the aisle are sharing some data on the coverage per congressional district based on a study that was conducted by the Center for American Progress, which is a left-leaning organization to begin with. But the Center for American Progress employs a flawed methodology for estimating this coverage. In fact, their foundational numbers are actually based on CBO's coverage estimates that the CBO itself has established are not infallible. These coverage numbers only take into account plans that they consider comprehensive major medical policies. This is a term that is used in the very law that we are trying to dismantle today. These coverage estimates do not account for things that we have in our bill, such as HSA plans that allow purchase with tax credits or mini medical plans. So the ACA increases freedom for Americans to purchase the kind of coverage that works for them, not the narrowly defined coverage that we see that the federal government likes. And with that, it is my honor to yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from California, a member of our committee, Mr. McClintock.
Gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I simply want to underscore what the chair lady has already laid out. When my friend from Kentucky says that his constituents will lose coverage, he's basing it on two premises. He's ignoring the $90 billion of additional funds that we freed up in the Budget Committee to assure that nobody will face sticker shock as we make this transition. And second, he assumes that the only reason that people buy insurance is if we force them to buy it. The reality is many are refusing to buy Obamacare policies even when they are faced with these crushing tax policies. The AHCA replaces this heavy-handed and failing bureaucratic nightmare. Ultimately, we're going to be judged not on polls or fairy tales, but on whether the vast majority of Americans have a better experience with this new consumer-driven market than they had with the bureaucratized, one-size-fits-all Obamacare system. That system has already been weighed in the balance and found wanting by the American people. And I am here to stake my reputation on the prediction that they will find better policies with better services at lower costs when they are restored the freedom to be consumers in a marketplace with a supportive tax structure that assures that these policies are within the financial reach of every American family.
From Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague that his vote for this bill will result in 38,200 people from his congressional district in California losing health coverage and care. And I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from California, a distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Carbajal.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you for yielding, Congressman Yarmouth. Before I came to Congress, I worked in local government as a county supervisor. One of my proudest achievements during that time was working in a bipartisan way to create a program that reduced the rate of uninsured children in our county by over 90%, all before the Affordable Care Act was signed into law. Since the Affordable Care Act, I saw firsthand the direct and positive impact of this legislation over the past 7 years to communities and families across the Central Coast. The Affordable Care Act meant Sarah from Lompoc could open her small business and afford insurance coverage for her 2 children. It meant that Kathleen in San Luis Obispo, who was diagnosed with ovarian breast cancer, that her $500,000 medical bill was covered by her health care plan. It meant that Adrienne from Buellton now could afford to pay for her husband's nursing facility as his debilitating disease prevents her from being able to physically care for him. Repealing legislation that has improved the quality of life, not only for Sarah, Kathleen, and Adrienne, but for over 20 million Americans who have gained health insurance under the Affordable Care Act would be callous, cruel, and irresponsible. Instead of taking away health care from 24 million Americans, let's work together to create a more equitable, affordable, and accessible health care system for all. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield a minute to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Sanford.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thanks, gentlemen. I want to make clear that I agree with what every Republican speaker has said thus far on the need to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. And I want to say how much I admire the Speaker and the leadership team, President Trump and his team, Chairwoman Black, and others on the Budget Committee for what you've brought to bear. My simple question is one of timing. What I tell my boys consistently is if you don't know, you don't go. And one of the things that I think we have to really look at in this bill is one of process, because it does do a lot of good things, as has been pointed out by the Republican speakers. But it still leaves in place community rating. It leaves in place the architecture, I think, of a flawed bill that came with the Affordable Care Act. And the question is, can we build on top of that to do the very good things that are talked about in this bill? Or do we take just a little bit more time to make certain that we have it right? I think that when you look at this notion of lowering premiums, liken it to rent control in New York. Rent control in New York has done a lot of good for some folks, but it's hurt a lot of others in the process. And the question we fundamentally have to ask ourselves is, at this juncture, can we make the changes necessary? Well, to be continued. Thank you.
Gentleman from Tennessee, or from Kentucky.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I want to mention my colleague that his vote for this bill will result, or against this bill, will result in 56,600 people from his congressional district in South Carolina losing health coverage and care. And I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlelady, 105 seconds, Mr. Speaker, to the gentlelady from Texas, a distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentlelady is recognized for 105 seconds.
I thank the distinguished gentleman of the Budget Committee. I thank him for his leadership. Our mothers and our doctors have warned us about poison pills. Well, let me say that this morning the Republicans are giving to the American people a poison meal that would affect my friend, the senior citizen, with $175 billion being taken away from Medicare. A poison meal that affect my young child who is being seen by a doctor, where the American Association of Children's Hospitals, including the Texas Children's Hospital, has said vote no on this bill because 30 million children will have no health insurance. This will impact working families making $31,000 a year, where they will have to pay $4,000 more out of pocket. And in 2026, to pay more for less, 52 million Americans will be uninsured. This poison meal is getting worse and worse. And then in the dark of night, what did they do? They took away your hospitalization. They took away pregnancy, maternity, and newborn care. They took away your mental health and substance abuse. Those states that are experiencing the opioid abuse and epidemic, what are you going to do? They've threatened community health centers. They're closing rural hospitals. What is this disaster of Trump care? It is injuring my good friend who's sitting there in the hospital room. It is injuring Anna Nunez. It is injuring small businesses who say that they can live better under the Affordable Care Act. Or the youngster that's a junior in college who said she would not be alive had it not been for the Affordable Care Act. More than half of the American people and growing are against this bill in the dark of night. It is the poison meal that is keeping those who need health insurance away from health insurance. I ask my colleagues to vote no. Don't feed the American people.
Expired. Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I yield back.
And it is my honor to yield to the distinguished member from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, who's also a member of the Budget Committee.
Thank you. I encourage all my colleagues
How
to
much
vote.
time does gentlelady? How much time?
2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Okay, I'd like to encourage my colleagues to vote for the bill. And the reason I ask you to vote for the bill, we're kind of like the reverse. What's going to happen if this bill fails? Okay? If this bill fails, we won't be able to have the huge increase in funding in HSAs, a free market, patient-centered tax provision, which is going to help many people, and particularly allow flexibility for older married couples. If this bill doesn't pass, we're going to continue to levy fines on young people who don't want health insurance, as so many people have not had health insurance when they're young. We're going to continue to levy fines on small businesses that can't afford the health insurance. If this bill fails to pass, we're not going to allow states to put work requirements on Medicaid. And quite frankly, now Medicaid in many ways is a more generous policy than that policy that people who do work are able to afford through their insurers. If this bill doesn't pass, we won't be able to stop the bleeding on Medicaid funding. We're approaching a $20 trillion debt. And of course, the bulk of that spiraling debt is caused by mandatory spending, of which Medicaid is one of the worst parts. Finally, for the first time in years, we're passing a law that will make a significant dent in that mandatory spending. If this bill isn't passed, we prevent putting a provision here requiring documentation of citizenship for Medicaid. Right now, we're becoming the health care provider for the world. We cannot afford to become the health care provider of the world. Under this bill, we're providing funds, seed money for high-risk pools for states, which will hold down insurance costs, which is the underlying problem we have here. If this bill doesn't pass, we continue to fund abortion providers. And for the first time, I think this is the best bill in decades for those of us who wish we would stop funding these organizations. We're providing assistance for people who can't get insurance through their employer, something that it's high time the tax code provided equality for people who get insurance from their employer and who don't. And finally, if we don't pass this bill,
Gentleman's time has expired.
We don't
I
end
yield
Obamacare.
an additional 30 seconds.
We don't end Obamacare. Already we have a third of the counties in which you only have one provider. If we don't pass this bill now, we're going to go into the next year and we're going to find a lot of people who think they have Obamacare have nothing because there'll be no providers left. We have got to step in to save those people and provide insurance in those counties in which Obamacare will leave no insurance companies remaining. Thank you.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague that his vote for this bill will result in 44,600 people from his congressional district in Wisconsin losing health coverage and care. And I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Illinois, a distinguished member of the Budget Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee, Ms. Tchaikovsky.
Gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
I sincerely ask my Republican colleagues, did you really come here to take health care away from 24 million people? Over 40,000 people in my district will lose their coverage. Did you come to Congress to make insurance more expensive for my constituent Mary, who has a pre-existing condition and now pays half of what she used to pay for insurance because of the tax credits she got from Obamacare? Did you come to Congress to impose a crippling age tax on Americans 50 to 64 years old? Your bill would increase their premiums an average of $8,000 a year. According to the CBO, within 10 years, nearly 30% of those 50 to 64-year-olds would be without any insurance. And did you really come to Congress to take nursing home and home care away from the elderly and the disabled? Did you get elected in order to take health care from mothers? Because your bill would kick them off of Medicaid if they don't find a job 60 days after they give birth. We've heard over and over that patients need choices and should be empowered to choose the care that they want. But apparently that doesn't apply to women because the bill would block millions of women from choosing Planned Parenthood, a trusted health care provider to 2.5 million patients every year. The American people are not clamoring for you to repeal Obamacare. Only 17% of Americans say that you should vote to repeal Obamacare. The average American is overwhelmingly want you to vote no.
Expired. Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's now my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Marshall, who is a physician. I yield him 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Kansas recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Kansas voters sent me to fix health care. Doing nothing is not an option. I cannot sit here idly while the ACA destroys and bankrupts America's healthcare system. This bill eliminates nearly $1 trillion of taxes. This bill eliminates funding for Planned Parenthood. This bill will save many hospitals in Kansas from closing by increasing funding for Medicare patients. This bill allots $100 billion for high-risk pools. This bill specifies another $15 billion specifically for maternity coverage, which is near and dear to my heart, newborn care, mental health, and substance abuse disorders. Mr. Speaker, this is the best bill that we can get through this process. I'm excited to be part of it. This is the first chapter of a new book, many more chapters to come. We will fix health care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague that his vote for this bill will result in 50,000 people from his congressional district in Kansas losing health coverage and care, and I yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, in concluding the presentation from the Budget Committee, I just have to say that the bill we're considering today is a mess. It's not a health care bill at all. This bill is driven by a desire to cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans and to many wealthy corporations, nearly $1 trillion in all. And it's paid for by making health care unaffordable for millions and millions of people. This is irresponsible. It's not what the American people want, it's not what they deserve, and it's certainly not what they can afford. But we are not the only ones opposing this legislation. It's opposed by an amazing array of American organizations and individuals, including the American Medical Association, the American Hospital Association, the American Nurses Association, the National Rural Health Association, AARP, the National Disability Rights Network, the American Diabetes Association, American Cancer Society, Easter Seals, virtually every healthcare and consumer advocacy group, governors from both sides of the aisle, and a growing list of our Republican colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I urge all of my colleagues on behalf of the Budget Committee, and first of all, I want to thank the Budget Committee staff for the incredible job they've done throughout this process. And as I yield back my time, I would like to designate the management of the minority time to the Chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Pallone.
Without objection, the gentleman's time is reserved. Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to remind my fellow colleagues that currently, when we look at the access to care for people, 1/3 of our counties only have one provider, 2/3 of our counties only have 2 providers, and in my state of Tennessee, there are 14 counties where they will have no insurance provider on the marketplace. So when we talk about people losing their insurance, they're losing their insurance from not having access to even purchase the insurance. One of my former colleagues, the gentleman from Minnesota, asked, what are my colleagues on the other side of the aisle trying to preserve? And I want to point to this chart here to ask that question, because these are the broken promises of Obamacare. Why are you trying to preserve something where they say premiums will decrease by $2,500 and we see the average family premiums have soared by $4,300, making insurance unaffordable for many families? Another broken promise, the cost of health care will go down. We see some deductibles that have gone up as much as 60%, and in my own state, they've gone up by 63%, making coverage unaffordable. You can keep your doctor. 70% of the plans consist of narrow networks, which means they cannot keep their doctor. I cannot tell you the number of people that have called me because their doctor was not on their inept plan. And finally, middle-class Americans won't see a tax increase. This was a promise by former President Obama, and Obamacare penalties were put in place where people are receiving a tax penalty. So these are the broken promises that the other side of the aisle wants to continue to protect. As opposed to that, we want a system that is going to be open with patient care and give affordability for people to get the services that they want with a cost that they can afford. And with that, I also want to thank our Budget Committee for the work that they've done, all the staff that have just worked endless hours to make this possible for us to be here on the floor today. And with that, I now yield 30 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, Chairman Walden, for him to manage the time.
Gentlelady's time is reserved. Without objection, the gentleman from Oregon will control 30 minutes. Gentleman from Oregon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. After 7 years, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
After 7 years, we've heard the stories of our constituents, patients, friends, and family who have suffered under Obamacare. We've heard those who have benefited in some respects. I think of the struggles of constituents like Indra from Bend, Oregon. She lost her private insurance and her preferred doctor. When she went to look for a new plan under Obamacare, she found the plans were too expensive and went without insurance for almost 2 years. See, her story should not be lost in this debate either. Then there's April. Last fall, she found out her insurer would not be offering her plan this year. The most comparable plan available would raise her monthly premium by $564 per month, bringing her total monthly premium to $1,503. You see, there's a whole other group of Americans out there who are suffering these effects of Obamacare. The American Health Care Act represents a better way for patients like Indra and April all across our country. Our plan will rescue and revitalize the market and lower costs and increase flexibility for patients to choose. They'll have more choices of health care and keep a health insurance plan that works for them and for their family. This legislation creates the Patient and State Stability Fund. Now, this is an innovative approach to give states the financing and flexibility to repair the damage done to the insurance markets by Obamacare and meet the unique needs of their citizens. And more importantly, we provide an additional $15 billion, Mr. Speaker, to states devoted for maternity coverage. We heard from people who said we need to do more in this area. Newborn care, mental health, and substance disorders. We're also taking actions to strengthen Medicaid. We want to put Medicaid on a sustainable path so it can better care for those it was intended to serve, a path through this per capita program for states that, frankly, was one time embraced by Democrats, including President Clinton. The most vulnerable in our communities need this help. It represents the most substantive reform to Medicaid program since its creation and will restore power to our states and local communities and governments where they can make better decisions than a one-size-fits-all here in Washington. We want to give our states more control in how they manage these people that they're closest to. Closing, I want to thank our colleagues and the President of the United States and the Vice President and Secretary Price. They have worked day in and day out timelessly without hesitation to help get to the best policy possible here and to work and listen to our colleagues as we've all done to craft the best bill we can, given the constraints under which we must operate. The end result highlights the diverse ideas of our conference that come from the American people and the determination that we share to save this market and make it work again. Remember, we're talking about a narrow slice of the insurance market, that driven by Obamacare, that last year, there were 225 counties in America where if you were looking for insurance on that exchange, you had one option. This year, it's 1,022 counties. That's 1 out of every 3 in America, and that was before Humana pulled out, and other companies said this market's about gone. We need to fix this market. That's what this legislation seeks to do. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank our terrific staff that's worked day and night to get us to this point. We know there's a lot more work to do. This should not be taken in isolation as the only health care reform on our list. We're going to go after the cost drivers. We're going to go after prescription costs. We're going to go after hospital costs. Wherever it is in the health system, if you have nothing to hide, you won't have to fear our investigations, but we're going to get costs down. We're going to get costs down. American Health Care Act is just the first step in our mission to rescue the American people from failures of the underlying law. We know they're there. We're going to fix this. We are committed to it. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I remind my colleague, my chairman, Greg Walden, that his vote for this bill will result in 64,300 people from his congressional district in Oregon losing health coverage and care. Mr. Speaker, President Trump and congressional Republicans are not leveling with the American people when they say no one will be worse off under this repeal bill. Trump Care dismantles the health and economic security that millions of hardworking Americans have gained over the last 7 years, and it should be defeated. There's a reason this bill was hatched up in the back rooms only to be finalized last night, and that's because congressional Republicans did not want the American people to see what was in it. Trump Care provides less coverage, fewer protections, and higher costs. Trump Care is Robin Hood in reverse, taking benefits and financial assistance from hardworking middle-class Americans and our most vulnerable in order to give tax breaks to the wealthiest and the corporations. Trump Care cuts a combined $1 trillion from Medicare and Medicaid. These cuts are devastating, Mr. Speaker. Trump Care will ration care for the 76 million Americans who rely on Medicaid, including seniors with long-term care needs, Americans with disabilities, pregnant women, and vulnerable children. I fear for seniors, Mr. Speaker, those in nursing homes. When states get less money, what will they do? They'll give less money to nursing homes. We'll go back to the days that I remember in New Jersey when nursing homes were terrible places, where there weren't enough nurses, where there were fires because of lack of maintenance of the nursing home. Working families are going to pay more for less. They'll see their premiums and deductibles skyrocket. My GOP colleagues talk about high deductibles and co-pays. Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. You're going to see that this repeals the limits on deductibles and co-pays that exist under the current law. Out-of-pocket costs are going to go through the roof. The deductibles will go even higher. The co-pays will go even higher. The out-of-pocket costs will go even higher. And the bottom line is Americans between the ages of 50 and 64 will pay an age tax and be forced to pay premiums 5 times higher than what younger people pay for their coverage. I've heard my colleagues on the other side say, well, that's only fair. Well, I don't think it's fair that seniors should have to pay a lot more, that those between 50 and 64 should have to pay a lot more. But also, Trump Care leaves the sickest and vulnerable Americans at the mercy of insurance companies, allowing them to charge a 30% penalty or sick tax for those who are unable to maintain continuous coverage. So if you fail to pay your insurance for a month and then you want to get it again, even if you have a pre-existing condition, which is often the case, you're going to pay a 30% penalty or sick tax. I don't think that's very fair. And last night, in order to garner votes from the extreme right and their party, House Republicans added a provision that eliminates protections for essential health benefits. Now, maybe people don't understand that, but let me explain it. The ACA ensured that when a consumer purchased health insurance on the individual market or gained coverage through Medicaid expansion, that their plan would cover 10 critical essential benefits. Trump Care eliminates this guarantee, meaning that unscrupulous insurance companies can sell skeletal plans, junk insurance, without benefits for hospitalization, maternity care, mental health, drug treatment services, and Americans won't even know what they're getting. They won't realize that they have worthless insurance until they get sick and it's too late. The bottom line is this bill should be defeated for so many reasons, because so many more people will not have health insurance, because their costs are going to go up, and because they won't even know what insurance they're buying. We're going to go back to the old days of the Wild West when insurance companies could sell whatever junk insurance they want, and the public won't even know what they're getting. It's a disaster for the American people. I urge my colleagues to vote no.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Oregon.
I yield myself 20 seconds. The irony of that argument is it was just a year or so ago that every member of this House who was here at the time and the Senate by unanimous vote agreed to waive the essential benefits he just listed off for the employment market between 51 and 100. And by the way, those essential benefits don't apply to the large group market. So this has already been done. I now yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Texas, the vice chairman of the full committee, Mr. Barton.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute and a half.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend our
objection.
remarks. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I supported this bill when it came out of the Energy and Commerce Committee 2 or 3 weeks ago. I want to thank Chairman Walden for his excellent leadership. As he knows, I had some concerns about the bill at the time. I didn't think it addressed all the problems that we needed to address. And so at the start of this week, I was a no vote, a friendly no vote, but I was a no vote. But our Republican leadership in the House and the President and his senior advisors continued to involve themselves in constructive discussions with people like myself. And 2 days ago, they yesterday agreed to put back in the repeal of the essential health benefits provision. And that is a big win for conservative values. So I am now a yes vote. My friends on the left seem to think the only way to get a benefit is to have the federal government mandate it and then have the federal government pay for it. I'm here to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that markets work. If we create a health care market where people can choose their insurance that fits their needs, there will be plans that provide for every so-called essential health benefit, but there will also be plans that provide for specific markets of young people without children or elderly couples or whatever it is. Mr. Speaker, markets work, and you don't have to mandate benefits for those markets to work.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman.
Could I have 15 seconds?
Yeah, I yield the gentleman 15 additional seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I was recognized. Mr. Speaker, we always want to score a touchdown. Sometimes we take a field goal. What we don't want to do today is take a safety. Vote for this bill. Let's send it to the other body and continue to work to improve it. It's a good bill. Please vote yes.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, remind my colleague that in Mr. Barton's case, his vote for this bill will result in 64,900 people from his congressional district in Texas losing health coverage and care. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Eshoo.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, the American people are very smart. They listen up. They kind of knit their eyebrows together. They listen to the debate. They want the facts, and then they make up their mind. And what our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have brought forward today is a disaster for the American people, and the American people know it. You have 17% of the American people that are for your plan. And the reason why, they know they're going to be higher costs. Families are going to have to pay more and get less. Pay more for their premiums, more for their deductibles, and more in their out-of-pocket costs. You're taking health care away from 24 million Americans. That's more than the entire population of Australia. Who comes to the Congress to hurt people? The promise of the Affordable Care Act was no one ever again will be able to take away your insurance the way the insurance companies did 7+ years ago. Now it's only the Republican Party that can take away the Americans' insurance. There isn't one developed country in the world that has your plan. It's a combination of all kinds of things to get votes. What free markets? What are you talking about? There's hypocrisy here because you all have the Affordable Care Act insurance. Every single member of Congress does. So I guess it's good enough for you, but it's not good enough for your constituents. This is a matter of life and death. You're playing with people's lives. It's a profound issue.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
This doesn't deserve
Gentlelady's time
one
has
vote
expired.
in the House of Representatives.
Gentlelady's
Vote
time
it
has
down.
expired.
Good afternoon, everyone. There's a lot going on today, so I'm going to try to keep this on the briefer side. This morning, the President announced the official approval of the presidential permit for the Keystone XL pipeline. The last administration spent 8 years delaying this enormous investment in American energy independence. President Trump is moving this project forward in just 8 weeks. And just as he promised, it's an even better deal for the American people than before he took office. This project will directly generate an estimated 16,100 jobs, according to the State Department, all without spending a dime of taxpayer money. In many ways, this project represented everything that was wrong with the infrastructure permitting of the United States. TransCanada spent an incredible amount of resources attempting to comply with government regulations, only to be denied and delayed for political reasons. But the days of pointless government bureaucracy holding up progress in production have ended. By simply getting excessive duplicative regulations out of the way, we can make infrastructure projects more attractive, a more attractive prospect for private investors, and encourage even more projects like this one. Immediately following the announcement by TransCanada, the President announced that Charter Communications has committed to investing $25 billion here in the United States and hiring an additional 20,000 American workers over the next 4 years. Charter Communications is truly an example of how American leadership can turn a downward into an amazing success. 5 years ago, Charter Communications was a struggling company that had slowly emerged from bankruptcy. Today, thanks to the hard work and great leadership of Chairman and CEO Tom Rutledge, it is the fastest growing television, internet, and voice company in the nation. And most importantly, as Charter grew, American jobs grew, as they brought back many jobs that had previously been shipped overseas. Today, Charter is also committed to completely ending its offshore call centers, basing 100% of them in the United States. Together, the TransCanada and Charter Communications announcements demonstrate the new economic model by what the President calls, quote, the American model. By slashing job-killing regulations and reducing government burdens and lowering taxes, we will make it easier for all businesses to grow right here at home, generating jobs and boosting our economy by getting government out of the way. Following these big announcements, the President had lunch with Secretary of the Treasury Steve Mnuchin. He was joined by Speaker Paul Ryan. I'll update you in a second on that. Later in the afternoon, the President will host a Greek Independence Day celebration. And as I mentioned yesterday, at 4 o'clock, he will meet with about 24 Medal of Honor recipients to honor Medal of Honor Day, which is technically tomorrow. He's honored to be hosting these great men and women of our armed services, the greatest force for peace and justice the world has ever known. And obviously later today, the House will be voting on the American Health Care Act. The current vote is scheduled for 3:30. The President has been working the phones and having in-person meetings since the American Health Care Act was introduced. He's left everything on the field when it comes to this bill. The President and congressional Republicans promised the American people that they would repeal and replace this broken system. Obamacare's Washington-driven, one-size-fits-all plan had 7 years to prove its case. And look what it's left us with. Skyrocketing premiums. On average, premiums for Obamacare benchmark plans increased 25% in 2017. Unaffordable deductibles, the two most popular Obamacare health plans have average deductibles equivalent to 10% and 6% of the median American household income. With these high deductibles, many people have technically insurance, but nothing that they can afford to use. Fewer choices. 1 in 5 Americans have only one insurer offering Obamacare through exchanges. And of course, higher taxes. Key conservative groups like the Tea Party Express and American Conservative Movement have added themselves to the long list of organizations expressing their support for the American Health Care Act because they know it's our chance, after the American people have spent years suffering, to finally repeal and replace the nightmare of Obamacare. The President looks forward to seeing the House Republicans join with these influential voices and vote in favor of the American Health Care Act. The President, as I mentioned, had Speaker Ryan come up here and visit with him to update him on the bill. They are continuing to discuss the way forward on this. The Speaker is updating him on these efforts. As I mentioned to many of you, the President has been working throughout the week on this, starting early in the morning and working till late at night, calling with members, visiting members. By our count, over 120 members have personally had a visit, call, or a meeting here at the White House in the past few days, which is an extraordinary feat. The President and his team have committed everything they can to making this thing happen, and the Speaker is going to continue to update him on the way forward. Finally, a few administrative notes here at the end. Yesterday, senior-level United States and Israeli delegations concluded 4 days of intensive talks with a particular focus on concrete near-term measures to improve the overall climate in order to advance the prospects of a genuine and lasting peace between Israel and Palestine. The United States delegation was led by Jason Greenblatt, Special Representative for International Negotiation, and included representatives of the NSC and the Department of State. A principal focus of the discussion was specific measures that could have a meaningful impact on the economic environment in the West Bank and Gaza, allowing the Palestinians to more fully realize their economic potential. 2 delegations also discussed Israeli settlement construction. The fact that both governments dedicated such senior delegations for so many days reflects the close cooperation between these countries and the importance that both assign to this vital task. Last night, the President announced his intention to nominate several key additional people to the administration, including Athea Coetzee to be Deputy Administrator of the Small Business Administration, William Francis Haggerty IV to be Ambassador to Japan, Robert Sumwalt III to be a member of the National Transportation Safety Board, and also this morning, of note, the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia upheld the President's revised executive order protecting the nation from foreign people who seek to do us harm into the United States. We're pleased with this ruling, which found that the plaintiffs had no likelihood of success on the merits of their claims. As the court correctly noted in its opinion, the President's order falls well within his legal authority to protect the nation's security. We're confident that the President's fully lawful and necessary action will ultimately be allowed to move forward through the rest of the court systems. In terms of the schedule for this weekend, the President will spend a working weekend here in Washington, and we'll update you with further details regarding his schedule. With that, get to your questions. Steve.
Is your understanding that you don't have the votes to pass the health care legislation? Is that the message that Speaker Ryan delivered today? And if so, what lessons do you draw from this process?
Well, I think the Speaker's currently having a conversation with them to talk about where that vote count stands. He's working with the members. The President made a sell. He had the Tuesday group here. There were 17 members here. 16 walked out as a yes. I think we've had a group of members that we've continued to have a conversation with and try to make. Frankly, at this point, it's not a question of negotiating anymore. It's understanding the greater good that's at hand. The President understands this is it. We had this opportunity to change the trajectory of healthcare, to help improve, put a healthcare system in place, and end the nightmare that Republicans have campaigned on called Obamacare. I noted yesterday it was the 7th year anniversary of Obamacare. We have an opportunity to make sure that was the last one, and the question is, do members realize this opportunity? There's no question, in my mind at least, that the President and the team have left everything on the field. We have called every member that had a question or a concern, tried to the extent possible, take into consideration ideas that would strengthen the bill, and it's now going to be up to the members of the House to decide whether or not they want to follow through on the promise of that. But we're going to continue to work with the Speaker and the leadership there to see, where the votes are. We're getting closer and closer, but you need to get to 216, and they've started 4 hours of debate. I expect a vote somewhere around the 3:30, 4 o'clock hour. Let's see where we go. Hunter.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. We're hearing that Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell wanted to do a clean repeal and then replace over time. In retrospect, would that have been a better approach? And in general, do you think Paul Ryan has handled this well?
I don't know that that's entirely the case. I know that this was a joint effort. This is something that the House determined in terms of the three-pronged approach that we had. So I don't know that I necessarily agree with the assessment of how that happened.
And in general, is the White House happy with how Paul Ryan has handled this?
I think the Speaker has done everything he can. He's worked really closely with the President. I think at the end of the day, I said this yesterday, you can't force people to vote. But I think we've given them every single reason to fulfill every pledge that they've made, and I think this is the right thing to do. Maggie, I don't want you to live tweet this anyway. So. Yeah.
What is the White House's view of if this does not pass and there aren't the votes? What does this mean going forward for other pieces of the president's agenda? Tax reform being the big one.
Yeah. Look, I don't. I've said it before. I don't think you tie any of these together. That's just not. I think there's a huge appetite for tax reform, and I'm not trying to juxtapose anything to do with today's vote or not. I think it would be great to see it put forward. The president's put a lot of time and effort into this, and I think he's made a strong case as to why this has to happen. I think we've worked with the House. If we don't get, if regardless of what happens today, and I still feel optimistic that the Speaker and the President and the Vice President, they got a team that's been up on the Hill most of the day. They're going to continue to try to get every vote they can, but that doesn't mean, whether it's immigration or tax reform, there's still a huge appetite out there.
Just to be clear, if this fails today, is the president done with healthcare?
So negative. That's what you're hearing. Well, I haven't heard that yet. So why don't we continue with a very positive, optimistic Friday? The sun's coming out. I feel really good. So we're going to continue to work as late as we can to get the votes. And as I said, the upside is that we continue to pick up votes. People continue to say that they want to be us. The question is, can we get to 216? But make no mistake about it. The president made it clear last night. This is it. You have an opportunity to do what you've told the American people, the commitment that we as a party have made. But this is your chance to do what we've done. We've listened, we've incorporated, we've updated in every way possible. I don't think, when you look at legislative efforts, I think the president has given it his all. And I think it shocked a lot of people, frankly, how very, very detail-oriented, how personal it was for him, calling members, as early as 6 in the morning, going to 11 o'clock at night the last several nights, sitting down, meeting after meeting with them, coming back and revising it, having his team back and forth. Everything's out there. And I think each of these members needs to make that decision, whether or not they believe that they've, at some point you can only do so much is what I would honestly tell you. And I think everything that we can possibly do to listen to members, to get their concerns in this piece of legislation, to make it as strong as possible for the American people, has been done.
But is the president comfortable then with Obamacare continuing? And what does he say
No,
to his
he's not.
supporters
Of course he's not.
With a promise that he would repeal this?
I'm not even sure where to start with that. No, he's not, which is why he's literally put as much effort as he has into repealing this. But he's made it clear that this is our moment. This is our opportunity to do it. But it is now up to members to make that decision whether or not they want to be part of this effort to repeal Obamacare. And if they don't, and I think for a lot of you saw the president's tweet this morning, I think for a lot of these members who life is an important issue as well, this is your opportunity. But it's ultimately them that have to go down on the floor and cast that vote. And I think that we've been able to cast a bunch of votes over the past couple of years when you knew a president wouldn't sign it. You now have a president that's going to sign the bill if you pass it. And now is that time. Zeke.
8 or so months ago, the Republican National Convention president said to the American people, I alone can fix it. Throughout the entire campaign, his message to his voters, the American people, was he's a businessman. He knows how to get deals done. He knows how to break the gridlock in Washington. He knows how to. He's the closer, is what you said earlier this week. If this vote does go down, what does this say about the president? Is the president humbled by this process? And is he, will he readjust the?
Let's not.
Administration going forward?
I'm not, like I said to Jill. I'm still optimistic. I feel like we're continuing to work hard, but at the end of the day, you can't force somebody to do something. I think there's nobody that objectively can look at this effort and say the president didn't do every single thing he possibly could with his team to get every vote possible. And I think that's why, I still feel good about this. But, we are where we are, and members have got to make that decision for themselves. This is the final hour to make that decision. Blake.
Sean, is it under any consideration to pull the bill at all between now and then?
You guys are so negative.
Well, there's reports out there.
I understand, but there are reports out there. The speaker and the president are talking now. The leader and the whip are, doing their vote counts. The debate is ongoing. We're going to continue. We are proceeding with a 3:30 vote as scheduled. John,
take me through some of, if you don't mind, the thinking yesterday when the bill was pulled, and then the president had made the decision, or his team, they went to the Hill saying there's going to be a vote today. At what point did he make that calculation? Why did he make that calculation? Can you bring us through some of that?
Yeah,
thinking?
There's a couple things. One is I think we wanted to be as open as possible with the vote. Having it on the current trajectory last night, it was going into the wee hours of the morning, and I don't think that for all that we've talked about, that wasn't the appropriate way to vote. I think we decided to work with the House and ask that they postpone and make sure that it was done in the light of day. But I think that he's had enough discussions, and it is not about improving the bill anymore. I think he has taken into consideration every member's thoughts and concerns and relayed those to the House. And I think to the extent that this balance of trying to get to 216 in this case is such that there are some people that come in with ideas and you say, if you do that, to get your vote, I'm going to give up 26, or to get these 3, I'm going to give up 12. And I think we have struck in the right balance right now and incorporated it, and it's the strongest possible bill. But he's going to continue to work as hard as he can until the very end. Charlie.
How important is a live vote to the White House and to the president watching to see who's on his side and who's not?
We know. We have a whip. We've seen the whip counts. The whip, Mr. Scalise has done a phenomenal job with Leader McCarthy. We know who's, where the vote count stands, and so it's not. We don't need a live vote to tell us where the votes are. People have been pretty straightforward with where they are and what their outstanding issues are.
The president and the speaker are meeting right now. Can you tell us anything about the character of that meeting, or what exactly they're looking at going forward?
Well, they're discussing. They're not looking. They're sitting down and talking about where it stands, some of the outstanding issues, and whether they're onesies or twosies or five. How many? What are the concerns and outstanding issues of some of the blocks and some of the individuals, and having a discussion on that. Anita.
Sorry.
If there's somebody that's going to ask when it passes, and you can.
Okay, well, do you want to have a briefing right after the vote? Okay.
All right, you got score 1 for you.
If the bill doesn't pass, does the president still have confidence in
I think he answered that question earlier
today.
today.
Well, does he think that he should step down if it doesn't pass?
He answered that question earlier, and he said he did. So. Asked and answered.
And then logistically today, after the vote, whatever happens, how will we get a response from you all?
Electronically or verbally, but one of the two. Peter.
Thank you, Sean. This is the president's first foray into the legislative sausage-making process, so to speak.
Yeah.
Has he reflected at all the experience? How does he feel it differs from, for example, negotiating a real estate deal, a business deal? Is it more complicated? Is it trickier? What's his feelings about it?
I think we'll have plenty of time to reflect on it after we do this. So I'll know. I know that I'll just leave it at that for now. Kristen.
Thanks. Without prejudging the outcome of the
Thank
vote.
you.
Does the president in any way regret pursuing health care first, given how complicated it has been?
No. I think if you think about it legislatively, in order to maximize, and I know this for most people it doesn't make a ton of sense, but the savings that you achieve through the first reconciliation of healthcare, which we're doing through the 2017 budget process, which still continues, allows us to utilize the savings in that process to maximize additional tax reform measures that will start in the FY 2018 reconciliation process. So while that sounds like a ton of inside baseball gobbledygook, the reality is in order to maximize tax reform, both on the corporate side to make our businesses more competitive and to give individuals, especially middle-class Americans, more tax relief, doing this in that way maximizes the amount of savings that you can use for the second reconciliation package, which would be tax reform. Doing it the first way, you can do, but again, you're not going to achieve the full potential that you could if you did it the way that is happening now. But that being said, I mean, it's not a question of, we all knew how big this was. It's 1/5 of the economy and what it took. The issue is that I think, you know, the disparate interests that are there and some of the process explaining, if you will, that understanding the way that this is happening, and I think legislatively it's complicated. And for a lot of folks, you know, that just understand, why can't you do it all in one foul swoop? What's the Byrd rule? What's reconciliation? Why do you have to do it in 3 phases? I think for a lot of people that is a little bit complicated to understand and and it's not just a question of understanding. I think one of the other things that the president and the team have found is that there's a lot of issues where people are wondering, well, if I vote for this, how can I guarantee that I get something in phase 2, which is the administrative pieces that Secretary Price would institute. And then third is, well, you know, these legislative things that will take 60 votes that complete the overall package. You know, how do I have trust? And so there's a lot of the comprehensive nature of this makes it very complicated. And I think that's a lot different. Normally you have one bill that sails through and it deals with all of these things and you can roll it all in. If someone has an amendment, you add it in. In this process, we're having to have all these one-off discussions about, you know, will the Senate accept this if you put it in? If you put it in, will they not only will they accept it, but will the Byrd rule take place and kick out the whole thing? There's that complicates this probably like nothing else.
Understood. Just to put a fine point on it, though, was it his initial ask to do healthcare first, or did House Speaker Paul Ryan say,
I think this was something that during the transition we sat down and gamed out in coordination with the House in terms of what should go first and why. But again, it's not a question of just what should go first. It's a question of, if you don't do it first, you know, do you lose some of the potential and savings that you would achieve through the second reconciliation?
Would it have been wiser to try to work with the Freedom Caucus, for example, on something like infrastructure reform to build up some goodwill?
I think, look, Kristen, we've talked about this since 2010. Every Republican, with the exception of probably a handful, has campaigned from dog catcher on up that they would do everything they could to repeal and replace Obamacare. And I think to get in and say, hey, you should have done something else, wouldn't be fair to the American people who have said, okay, I'll vote for you, but I want you to fulfill this pledge.
And just finally, does the buck stop with him on this?
Well, I mean, like I said earlier, you can't force someone to vote a certain way. I think in the sense that, has he done every single thing? Has he pulled out every stop? Has he called every member? Has he tweaked every tweak? Has he done every single thing he can possibly and used every minute of every day that's possible to get this thing through? Then the answer is yes. Has the team put everything out there? Have we left everything on the field? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, this isn't a dictatorship, and we've got to expect members to ultimately vote to, you know, how they will according to what they think. But I think as the president made clear, they're the ones who have to go back and answer to their constituents why they didn't fulfill a pledge that they made.
Non-healthcare question for you. Regarding these documents that Devin Nunes says show incidental intelligence collection of identifying information about people associated with Trump campaigns, can you categorically rule out that Chairman Nunes received or was alerted to these documents from someone at the White House?
I'm not aware of where he got the document from. I don't know.
Can you rule out that they came from the White House?
I can't. I don't know where he got them from. He didn't state it, so I don't have anything for you on that, and so I cannot say anything more than I don't know at this point, Cecilia.
So if the president has done everything he can possibly do, and the speaker has done everything he can possibly do, the team has put everything on the table, who's to blame right now for this holdup in your mind?
Again, let's wait and see how this thing. I'm not assigning blame.
But you wanted to vote even last night or this morning, so there is a stall. So from last
No,
night
no,
to
no.
this morning.
We did want to vote last night, and I think as I mentioned, as we got into the evening hours, the idea wasn't to bury this at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning.
Well, initially, you were asking for one yesterday, and there was a statement from your
No,
press
no,
office.
and I'm not backing away from that. We wanted a vote yesterday, but as we got the process went on, we realized that vote would occur probably actually into today, in terms of like calendar wise, and that doing it at 1, 2, 3 in the morning was not something that would be in keeping with what we had promised.
So who's to blame for the stall?
I
right
don't.
now? Is the
There's no.
Freedom Caucus? Is it-
I think it's not a blame right now. It's a question of getting all these members together and dealing with all. I mean, you've seen the activity. You've seen the members go back and forth. It's right now we're still in that active discussion phase with trying to figure out who we can get on board and whether or not we can move forward. But we're not there yet.
But you put this ultimatum out there. Is the president right now still confident that he can see this bill through?
The president is confident that we have done every single thing possible, made the case, updated it, added, and done everything to listen to the concerns and to do everything that fulfills the promises that we and members have made with the American people. John.
Thank you, Sean. Without prejudging the outcome of the vote today, but focusing on your comments and the president's saying this would be a vote against life if people voted against it. Several Republican members said they did not want the vote on Planned Parenthood in this particular bill. Congressman John Faso of New York was particularly outspoken. Did anything come up in the negotiation or from the White House of saying they guarantee a separate vote on Planned Parenthood and leave it out of the bill?
I'm not aware of that, John. I'm not aware that happened.
And the White House, from your tone and the president's, the White House wanted the Planned Parenthood vote in?
I'd have to go back and look at. There's a lot of discussions that go on. I honestly can't remember how or when that came up.
The other thing I wanted to ask was that the last two members who announced they were no, Chris Smith and Frank Lobiando, Republicans of New Jersey, both cited the number of Medicaid recipients in their district as their premier reason. Congressman Lobiando said in 3 counties, 30% of his constituents were on Medicaid and he wanted no damage. Was there anything discussed on Medicaid? Was it on the table in the negotiations?
Well, I know that there was a discussion about the expansion of Medicaid and some of the work requirements with respect to able-bodied Americans who are receiving that. But, I would say this, John, one of the things that, not member-specific to either of the members from New Jersey, is that members have to understand that the current system is unsustainable. So if you vote no today, then what is your alternative? And what do you want? Because right now, there's a lot of folks that have said they're gonna vote no, which is, their prerogative. But at the end of the day, the current Obamacare system will collapse on its own. And so the question that they have to ask themselves, or that they're going to be asked by their constituents, is then what is your alternative? Because right now, this is the choice that will save the system. The other choice is to do nothing, and that is going to collapse the system. Amen.
Thanks, Sean. The stock market's been largely looking at this as a proxy for how you're going to do on your tax cut proposal. Can you give me a sense of what the lessons learned here are about how this was handled that you might apply to the tax cut proposal?
Look, Eamon, I've discussed this earlier. I'm not going to start getting into lessons learned while we're in the middle of debate of a current bill. I mean, we'll have plenty of time. If you want to stop by over the weekend, we can talk about, I'd be glad to sit down with you on that. But again, we're not, right now, we're focused on getting the votes. The House has a vote scheduled. That's what our focus is, not to figure out, we'll have plenty of time for that. Jen.
Is the president going to just simply wash his hands of this today? If it
You got, look, we're not, the president's going to wash his hands several times, but I don't know.
A central campaign promise of the President of the United States.
I understand that, and so I get it. So slow down. Let's turn on C-SPAN, and I'll watch this together, and then we can discuss what happened. Jen.
Treasury Secretary Mnuchin was talking this morning about doing tax reform by the August recess. Do you think that that's a reasonable timeline, and why the rush? Are there any lessons learned from this healthcare debate
I
that would say we should
again,
do
I
it
think
quickly?
tax reform is something that we've talked about. There's plenty of time. I think it's a goal, and I think it's an ambitious one, and I think it's one that that we're going to try to stick to. But let's get by today, and then we'll lay it out. But I think tax reform is something that the president is very committed to. If you've seen him very publicly in the last couple open events talk about how excited he is to move on once this is done to tax reform, because he understands both sides of this, that the business piece of this, we are so uncompetitive when it comes to our other worldly competitors in terms of our tax rate. And that when we have these discussions about keeping companies from either shipping jobs overseas or growing, bringing back jobs to America, the two things that come up over and over again are our tax rate and our regulatory system. And I think he understands that on the tax front, we can be a lot more competitive with the rest of the world in growing American jobs here at home and, frankly, expanding manufacturing if we lower that. But also that the American middle class desperately needs and wants a tax break. And I think the more that we can do with that. So this is something that I think we're going to be continuing to work on, and we'll have more on that later. Trey.
Sean, how much credit will the president take for the outcome of this health care bill?
I'm going to refer you to like the last 8 people. Let's see where we go from here.
Quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Is the White House still as confident as they were earlier in the week, and is the president still as confident as he was earlier in the week that this health care bill will pass?
I would suggest to you, my answer that I said to Kristen is that we are confident that we have done everything. And it is now up to voters. I mean, the reason the president called for a vote, and respectfully, obviously it's not up to us, but the reason that he asked Speaker Ryan and Leader McCarthy to call for a vote is we've done everything. We've done every single thing that every meeting, every call, every discussion, every idea has been out there, adjudicated, listened to. And I think that now's the time for the vote. And so we're a couple hours away, and let's see where we go.
Does the level of confidence remain?
I think in the sense of what we did, yes. Peter.
I will ask you, the president can order every surveillance transcript that mentions himself or his associates in regards to Russia for the investigation that he called for to be brought to his desk at any time. Has he done that?
No.
So yesterday you had asked specifically, you said that the concern should be less about the process and more about the substance. I asked because that would be one way to get directly to the substance. On the substance, Devin Nunes said initially that he, quote, there was evidence that, quote, clearly showed that the president-elect and his team were at least monitored. Then today he said, asked if Trump or his associates were monitored or mentioned, he said, we don't know, we won't know until we actually receive all the documentation. The president said he's somewhat vindicated. So given the fact that Devin Nunes doesn't actually know if the president was monitored or whether he was even mentioned, what is he vindicated by?
Well, I think that there has been an acknowledgement that that there are documents out there showing that people were surveilled or monitored to some degree.
They could have exclusively been foreigners, Devin Nunes concedes.
Okay, well, Devin Nunes also made it clear that he's going to have a hearing later next week with several members of the intelligence community and calling them others back. And so let's wait and see what
is the president vindicated by?
The president said he felt somewhat vindicated because I think that there is an acknowledgement that that as we proceed down this discussion, it continues to show that there was something there, and that despite the constant discussion about the process, and hold on, Peter, I understand. I get this is. I understand that, and he also said that he's going to have a hearing and he's going to call the people back and he's waiting for the documents. So let's wait and let that process evolve.
Thank you, Sean. A couple of questions. First about Keystone. What changed? It seemed like it took forever in covering the Obama administration for this thing to finally get over the finish line. It never did, and relatively quickly, less than 65 days in, it's finally made its way over the finish line. What changed, especially with respect to the State Department's view of the Keystone XL pipeline? And is it your opinion that it would be good to hear from the president, win, lose, or draw, after what we learned today vis-a-vis healthcare reform?
So, simply put, on Keystone, it was a priority. I mean, the president came in, he signed an executive order on it. He had talked about it during the campaign, and he made it a priority. He made it a priority for his team here at the White House to get it done. not only the jobs, but incorporating U.S. Steel. And there's a lot of things. But I don't think it's any simpler than he made it a priority for him, his team, this administration, the Department of State, and others. And that's it. He recognizes the importance of that to both energy and to jobs in our economy. And simply got it done. And I'll leave it up to the president once we go forward to see how it goes on. Margaret.
Sean, as the deal maker, why does the president feel that this take it or leave it approach is the right one on healthcare?
Because I think he has done, I mean, you at some point you've listened to everybody, you've gotten all other ideas, you've gone back and forth, you've incorporated them, you've assuaged them in some way, shape, or form, you've updated the bill, and a lot of times it's the same people coming back over and over again. And you go, okay, I've listened to you, I've taken your ideas. At some point, we either have a deal or we don't. And I think that's where the president finally drew the line and said, we've been having this discussion, we've had the meetings, and we've done everything possible to address the concerns and ideas and opinions that people have brought up. And that, I mean, I don't think you can say it any simpler. I think he has done every single thing possible, and you end up at some point finding yourself going around and around and saying, okay, let's call the vote.
But isn't there a political cost to a collapse, potentially?
I think that at some point there's a political cost to dragging this out as well and saying, let's just keep letting it go. And I think that's where, you know, we've came to a decision that it had gotten as far as it can go. Caitlin.
If there's a collapse, though, isn't there a cost that the president will at some point have to, you know, pay for? If it's either cleaning up the collapse that you have been predicting.
No, I think that, look, this is...
Besides, you know, the upcoming election in 2018, I'm talking about economic impact, all the impact on the states.
I get it, and I think that what we'll have to look at the landscape. And at some point, you know, I think right now Democrats made a decision during this debate that they wanted to stick by Obamacare. I think at some point the president has talked about this, that, you know, this is going to collapse. And, you know, let's see where this thing heads. But I think right now we have a plan on the table that allows for a solution that will address all of the concerns that, frankly, were initially brought up as far as what the Affordable Care Act was supposed to do. Caitlin.
So if you know what the vote counts are right now, and there's no discussion of pulling the health care bill, and it gets closer to 3:30 and you still don't have the votes, why vote?
I'm not going to discuss our strategy. I mean,
But you see what I'm saying?
I do.
If you know what the votes are and you know that you don't have the votes for it to pass, why vote?
I understand your question. I'm just not going to comment on our strategy. I think the president and the speaker are going to have a discussion about where those votes are and what some of the members' needs are, and we'll take it from there. Athena.
You talked about all the work that the president and his team have put into this, the early morning calls, late calls. The other day, one of the members of Congress who was here to meet with the president, Congressman McHenry, called to say, we're bringing him to the closer. You embraced that nickname from the podium. Whatever happens today, do you still feel comfortable calling the president the closer when it comes to deal making on all this?
Look, I think I said it to Kristen and a couple others. I think he has done everything possible. There's no one, either on Capitol Hill or any honest observer of what's happened, that doesn't recognize the extraordinary feats. But at some point, as I've mentioned, this isn't a one-on-one negotiation. This is, you know, you have to get to 216, and I think part of this question is to go to some of those no's and ask them, you know, what is the reason and what would you do? And the problem is that, as I mentioned before, there's this balancing act where to get these two members, you're giving up 14, but we're doing everything possible to get to that 216, and that. I think when you actually objectively look at the effort that was undertaken, there's no question that every single thing that has been done to maximize the vote count on this.
And to be very, very clear, this has been addressed a few times, but I want to get a clear answer. You've talked a lot about how this is the chance, this is the opportunity for Republicans to make good on campaign promises. I asked the president a couple days ago what happens when you keep pushing if this fails today, and he said, "We'll wait and see. We'll have to see what happens." Can you say are you saying right now that there will be no future attempts to comply with that campaign promise if today's attempt fails?
I can't say that there'll never be, and I'm not going to be fatalistic. We've got to vote at 3:30. I know that the president's made it clear that this is the effort, this is the train that's leaving the station, and that he expects everyone, this is our opportunity. And he's got a lot left on the agenda that he wants to get done, whether it's, immigration, taxes, the border wall. There's so many other things that he wants to get done that we're not going to sit around and figure out. This is the opportunity. This is the time. This is the opportunity for every member who has said that they want to repeal and replace Obamacare to put their vote in the yes column.
And last one, if it does pass today, you talked a lot about this being done in 3 phases, today being
Right.
phase 1. Phase 2 and phase 3, one of the problems I think is that this is not information that is in scorable form. The steps that Secretary Price might take and then what may
Right.
end up in this final bill. Is there
Well, I don't know
anything
yet.
being
At some
done-
point, maybe it can be. I mean,
Can you put the administrative steps that the Secretary
I don't
Price-
know. That's
Is that something that's being attempted to be done? Because that's the kind
I
of
think right
information
now
I
we're
think
kind
members
of
want.
focused on the vote, but I think that we'll have either OMB or CBO take a look at not just the other elements, but can you look at it in its totality? I don't know but that's a good question that I can have the OMB folks address potentially with the CBO folks. Thank you, guys. I'm sure we'll have some additional updates for today. Thank you.
All right, folks, thank you very much. All right, folks, thank you very much for joining us and choosing us as your stream of choice. Tonight, there's going to be a podcast, a news podcast. It starts at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. So I hope that you guys join us. Thank you very much for watching. If you are new to the community, hit that subscribe button. And I hope to see you guys here next time. Thank you very much.